I don't pinch his drink. Steve, welcome along to the Surf Cafe. Great to have you here.
All inclusive this one.
Welcome along. Let's go back to the start of your career. When did you first kick a football, Steve? Where did you learn your craft?
To be honest with you, Steve, same as probably hundreds of thousands of other Geordie lads in the front street. Lamppost or the hedge next door with a few of my mates in Wallsend. Graduated to St Peter's Field, trying to nip onto actually where Newcastle train now. They're the only place that had nets at the time. It was the Gasport, I think, at the time, wasn't it? No, just same as any other Geordie lad, really. And then about, actually quite famous, really, because there's so many people asked us about that throwing I used to do. And it was literally just about 100 yards down there. We played heads and volleys, and I remember getting the ball on the beach, trying this daft throwing, and that was literally just down there. So I have plenty of memories around here, and I've just moved in about 400 yards up the road, so you might be seeing a bit more of us here without paying.
Rolling in and rolling out.
It's like a pint, like.
Tell us about your youth career and that. I mean, you know, what position were you playing, and you know, did you get the cup finals and stuff like that? How did you do?
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky. I was in a good school with good players. I was in the same school as Alan Thompson, and you know yourself, if you get two good players in a team with a few other good lads, you'll do well. So that was High Farm Middle in Wallsend, and then was split up when he went to Willington, I went to Burnside, but all the way through Wallsend Boys Club, following people like Peter, who we've had here, Alan, Brucey, you know, Carrick, loads of good players, and we had a really good team. We had me, Tomo, Rob Elliott, all the same age group. We had Lee, year above. So we pretty much dominated. And back then at Newcastle, it wasn't the academy. It was called the Centre of Excellence. So we started there when we were 10, with a fella called Stan Nixon, who was the coach, and Peter Kirtley, who was the scout. And there's only two back then, and Steve Howie was there, and you know, brilliantly that we all went through together, but we all ended up in the team together, the first team together, which for us lads, Geordie lads, obviously it's our version of what Man United did, albeit probably less trophies to show for it. But you know, we had 5 or 6 lads all come through the same era, all in the first team at the same time. So no, it was a great upbringing of football.
What position were you playing at that younger age?
Just pretty similar to how I spent my career, mate.
Versatile.
Dotted around everywhere. I was, funny enough, started off in goal. And I'll tell you about that later when, hopefully we're going to talk about the Anfield goal, so I'll be able to tell you about that then. But no, just everywhere. But I remember I was at Newcastle from 10 to about 15, and then got told at 15 that I wasn't gonna be kept on, and I was heartbroken. You know, I mean, I'm at the academy now, coaching similar age groups, and hardest thing to do is to tell a young kid, and the hardest thing for a young kid to hear is that. And I found out why. You know, and it was basically because I was so involved in every sport. You know, I was a basketball player at school. I was a cricketer. I played tennis. I was athletics for North Tyneside. I was high jumping. I was triple jumping. And I just think Newcastle thought that the focus wasn't solely on football, whereas Clarkie's was, Tomo's was. That's all they did. So I screwed me low for the last season at the boys' club. Ended up playing up front. So I had a great season, and then they came back for us right at the end and said, you know, you've done enough. You know, we've seen the reaction, and so I signed as a striker. And then made my debut about 5 months later, right midfield.
And you were the youngest player to play for Newcastle.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously being a Geordie, growing up watching the tune, just to get that debut was good enough, but to be the youngest ever player and still be it, you know, every time somebody comes through in the squad, I'm thinking, how old is he? Like? He's not ready yet. He's not ready. So yeah, luckily I've still got that.
Who was the manager at that time?
Jim Smith. Jim Smith was my first manager. Old school, proper old school, hard as nails. Seeing things in that dressing room that you couldn't prepare you for, and things that for young lads seeing it now, you know, you'd think the manager would need to be arrested for that. But it was just the norm once you got going. Teacups flying everywhere, tea against the wall, Jaffa cakes everywhere. But no, he gave us my debut, and I'll always be grateful for that. I've done well in the reserves. It was so, I was the youngest. That just shows people, people hit the peak at different times. People get ready at different times. Vardy, Smalling, they didn't come in. Stuart Pearce, all in the 20s when they started to become professional footballers. So I was the last person to sign, but obviously the first one in my age group to play in the first team. So it just clicked quickly. Made my debut against Wolves. It was in November. I don't know what was the most memorable. Me make my debut at 16, or Clarkey scoring a header. I think Clarkey thinks that. But and then from then on, Jim Smith will always be a hero of mine for that. But we had a pretty, a really senior team, and they helped us through a lot. We had people like John Burridge in goal, who was actually my first roommate. I don't know what again. Nowadays, looking at safeguarding and not being able to room. I'm rooming with Budgie, who's walking around naked with a pair of goalkeeper gloves on, asking us to fucking throw oranges at him. So things have changed in that respect.
I mean, it wasn't great in those days, was it? Great for you to make your debut, but it was, Newcastle were in the doldrums, weren't they, really?
Yeah, I mean, it was an old side, it was an experienced side, but we didn't have any energy. We had a great set of lads. But I remember my first team, as I said, Budgie, Ray Ranson, John Anderson, Kevin Scott, Mark Stimson. You had like Roy Aitken, Kevin Dillon, Liam O'Brien, Quinny and Mark McGee up front. All probably, apart from me and Lee and Steve Howie was knocking on the door then. Probably well in the 30s. So I think just having a bit of youth around, a bit of energy. I think it went down really well with the fans. Obviously, it'll always go down well with clubs, but especially up here, having one or two of their own in the team. So that helped me as well, because I was they took to us straight away.
Jim Smith never really recovered from losing the playoffs, did he? It was the first year of the playoffs. Newcastle had finished third, the third best team in the league. Sunderland, of course, managed to sneak into the playoffs, but beat Newcastle. It was 0-0 at home, I think, 0-0 away, sorry, and then we came back to St James's Park. Gabbiadini and Gates did us at home. We lost 2-0, and he never really recovered from that, did he?
No, it's a bit of a pill to swallow, isn't it? It couldn't got any worse, really. But no, I mean, I look at it, and I managed myself, and luckily for me, I've had one time where I've been sacked, and it was sort of mid-table, and it was a club that was expecting promotion. And but when I look back at my managers, and I didn't want to see any of them go. Well, I wouldn't mind seeing Hullett go, but I didn't mind seeing. You can understand. It probably was the right time for Jim to go. As much as I loved Ozzy, we were struggling, and then Kevin took over, and obviously Kevin decided to leave. But yeah, I mean, as much as I love Jim, you can understand why he had to go.
So you mentioned Ozzy. He was next in, and what was it like having a former World Cup legend, take over at St James's Park? It was good for the youngster.
Yeah, he was brilliant for us, and I think when you look at the success sort of Kevin had with Lee, probably Lee in particular, Steve, not so much myself in fairness, because I didn't play a lot in the promotion season, but a lot of that, and the younger lads as well, Robbie, Lee Makel, who are sort of backing the squad up. Ozzy needs to take a lot of credit for that. Ozzy really did sort of put a lot of faith in youth, probably to the detriment of results at times. He played front foot football. He didn't pay a lot of attention to what was going to happen without the ball. He was very positive thinking. He was really give a lot of trust to us, and he kept a good nucleus of the senior players who he thought could complement us. But ultimately the results were poor. I remember one game which summed Ozzy's spell up with us. And so again, we've got to take responsibility. We were young, but we knew what to do and what not to do. Remember we went 3-0 up against Charlton at St James's and ended up losing 4-3. And then I thought, that game sort of was the catalyst. And I think Ozzy's last game was against Oxford. Was it Oxford in the Cup? and this is, when they say a week's a long time in football. I remember Ozzy pulling me and Lee Makel, funny enough, before the Oxford game, and he said, this is going to be really tough from now to the end of the season. I'm going to need as many. That didn't happen, but I'm going to have that. I'm going to have a lot of seniors involved, and they're going to help. They're going to help get through this, hopefully. So you and Lee probably won't be used again till the end of the season. So obviously a bit deflated, and I think Ozzy got the sack on the Monday. I think Kevin came in on the Tuesday, introduced himself to us, and then I played the next game at Bristol City, Kevin's first game, and again played Kevin's first game and Kevin's last game. So it's another. I think that's another unique sort of thing. As much as I was in and out at times, I was lucky enough to play his first and last game. So I thought my season was over. And then you don't know if your career is going to be at Newcastle or not. And then something happened with Kevin. I don't know if the youth coaches sort of said, well, look, he's better than what we've got in the team at the moment. And I remember playing the first game against Bristol. So yeah, no. So obviously loved Ozzy. Just amazing to see Kevin, just because he was our idol anyway. I was Kevin, Peter, Chris. I was always Chris Waddle in the street, and Terry Mack, and to see Kevin and Terry Mack come in and become your managers, breathtaking for me.
In amongst all of that Ozzy Ardila situation, we had the ongoing battle for United, didn't we? Did that affect you as a young player? Because you had McKeague who was running the club, George Forbes came in, you had the shares issue, and then Sir John Hall and the Magpie Group, trying to wrestle the control of the club away. Did you pay much attention to that?
No, in all honesty, I was probably a mixture between me being so young and the fact that players don't really get involved. There's nothing players can do about that. They don't really get involved in, and there's not. Back then there wasn't social media. You couldn't pick a mobile up or a tablet up and read everything about it. It was just literally what you heard on the news or in the Chronicle Journal or Sunday Sun. So no, we didn't really. But what I will say about what I don't think gets mentioned enough about Sir John and Douglas and Freddie. It was a hell of a gamble for them to do what they did. To take the club over, but also to take Kevin on, who had never managed or coached before. It could have went either way, but as it happens, it couldn't have worked out better, really. Just not just him as a manager, but just the way that he got everybody, all of us in the city, all the staff around the club. The way I don't think anybody else could have come and got that reaction. So you have to give them a lot of credit for that decision, because it was a ballsy decision, that.
Yeah, definitely was. Keegan comes in 7 years on the golf course after he'd flown off in the helicopter from St James's Park, and he's managing. So you play in that first game. Can you remember the atmosphere and just the feeling around the club that day?
Yeah, I mean it had gone. We'll always have great support, but you understand that it had dropped a little bit. It would become a little bit flat. I remember playing sort of Tuesday night games, and it wasn't the St James's I remembered, and it just changed like that. I mean, everybody got on board. It was buzzing, and adrenaline got you through a lot of the games back then, and it just became a bit of a soap opera at the end of the season. And typical Kevin, the way it worked out. Last game of the season, just only Kevin could have written that. But not just that, the way he managed from then on, the decisions he made, some of them, harsh and tough. David Kelly, for instance, who'd done fantastically well, deciding for David can go and bringing in Andy Cole, who was relatively unknown, and things like that. He made brilliant decisions as well, and he wasn't scared to make hard decisions. He made decisions for the time, and he made decisions that got us promoted, and then he made harsh decisions the way he thought, well, now we're looking for people for the next step, and he was quite ruthless like that.
The key signing that a lot of people talk about, including Kevin back in the day, was Brian Kilcline. What did he bring to the team? He brought a calmness, and he doesn't look a calm bloke. He looks like a lunatic, doesn't he? But he's actually a really calm fella around the place. He's an absolute leader. He's a leader of men, and he was exactly what we needed at the time. He fit in brilliantly, and I agree with Kevin. He
he just epitomised that team at the time. You know, we were brilliant going forward, but we always had that reliability at the back, and he was a talker. When you had young players around him, he would in around the training ground. He was fantastic, and then later on from him, and I know Peter Beardsley looks nothing like Brian Kilcline, but Killer had the same kind of effect as Peter did when he came in, as in the respect, the standards, the everyday like quality control and training.
I think the one thing that surprised fans was Mickey Quinn. I mean, he was a goal scoring legend. He wore the number 9 shirt better than some of the recent incumbents of that shirt. What went wrong with Quinny and Keegan?
Well, Quinny will tell you better than me, and I think he quite enjoys telling the story. In fact, he's up tomorrow night. I'll make sure I remember it better this time. But no, he was now a goal scorer, Quinny, wasn't he? And but I just think Kevin saw the dynamics of the team in a different way, and you know what Quinny was like as a fella. He was very happy-go-lucky, but he was kind of an old school footballer, wasn't he? He wouldn't live the way Peter lives and the way Coley probably did.
He liked a night out.
Yeah, I mean, but we all did back then, didn't we? But I just think he just, again, like David Kelly and he eventually like Killer, I think it was almost a case of thanks what you've done, but I see this going differently.
The following season, after Newcastle had stayed up, didn't need to win at Leicester, but they did. Was again rebuilding, and they brought in some key players, and that team went unbeaten at the start of the season, 12 games in a row. Yeah, I mean that promotion season was special. The open top bus, the holiday to Cyprus. Luckily, all of us came back. Half of Killer's hair didn't come back, but I'm sure you've heard that story a few times. I will come to it.
But yeah, I mean, he, again, as I said, back then Kevin didn't have a recruitment officer, he didn't have a sporting director. All the scouting was done sort of in-house. But some of the signings he made, for very, very little money, really comparatively, best signing for me, Rob Lee. Bez, Paul Bracewell came in, done a great job. Venison came in, done a great. Scott Sellers, just made great signings. But what Kevin always had this ability to do, whether he meant it or not, you always seemed to get players in that had a fantastic camaraderie in dressing room. I've never been in a dressing room under Kevin where everybody wasn't best mates. And our relative success in the mid '90s, when we were cup finals and top of the league and what have you, that was all, not all down to, but that was in part down to everybody being just on the same page, everybody being best mates. We used to, if you'd done anything, it would be done as a group, and that's what Kevin had a really good knack at doing. He always put a really good squad together.
What was the training like? Because we hear, stories about it, being head tennis and, 5-a-sides and that's it. I mean, was it as simple as that?
Yeah. No, pretty much. I mean, we had it was just all about, Kevin's philosophy, I think, and Terry Mack used to tell us this as well, at Liverpool. That's literally what Liverpool, probably arguably the best British side that you've seen, dominance-wise. Man U were brilliant for a while, the Invincibles at Arsenal, but that 80s Liverpool team took some beating, and I think it was, that was their mantra really. They just used to play every day. So a lot of it was ball skills, technique work, making sure everybody could handle the ball. Always the day started with head tennis, but that was before training, and then. Terry will admit himself he wasn't a coach. He was more or less Kevin's number 2, but he didn't take any sessions. But the guy that really, when we did need work done, was Derek Fazakli, and Faz was a fantastic coach. He was a very, very good coach, and a lot of the time Kevin would just be on the pitch playing. So Faz was almost coaching Kevin at times. But listen, it seemed to work, and I know. I'll not be a night goes by where I don't wish I had a Premier League medal, and everybody gets the blame, from Tino to Kevin's defensive work, and really it's a collective blame. We all knew how to play the game. We all knew how we should have shut up shop at times, but it just it just wasn't to be.
Getting back to that promotion season, there was a goalkeeper who came through, sadly no longer with us, Pavel Cernicek. What was he like to play alongside?
Yeah, Pav, I mean, I think Pav came through with Jim Smith, and at the time you had very few foreigners in the squad, very few foreigners come up the northeast anyway. And this guy came up, was just an unbelievable athlete, spoke very little English, unbelievably flexible, like an athlete like we'd never seen before. And he'd pull off saves that you'd think were impossible, and then he'd do something where you'd think that was easy. And that was Pav, and Pav came at an early age, and I think by the time he'd got to Kevin's era, he'd become a very special keeper, but just a great bloke, just one of the best blokes you'll ever meet, one of the biggest misses you'll ever meet. And I just think Geordies don't often get it wrong, and the way that everybody took to him, and the fact when you see him wandering around the pitch on the promotion season with a grey t-shirt on, not the SMB one, the Pavel as a Geordie one. But no, I think everybody got him, didn't they? I think he was brilliant, and he spent a lot of time, and we had great goalkeepers along the way. We had Shaka come in and challenge him, and then later on, obviously, Shea Gibbon, who was probably the best goalie I've played with. But for a long time, Pav was a special part of the squad.
A couple of games that stand out, I guess, for me as a fan from that season, was Grimsby away when we sealed promotion, and then the final game of the season at home where we played Leicester and was 6-0 up at half time, and 2 hat-tricks, and it was just a faultless 45 minutes. I mean, what's your memories of those 2 particular games, just as a fan, but also as a player?
Well, in all honesty, I was a fan.
Yeah, you were. I remember.
I was in the stand most of that season. Again, I took it like. What was great about Kevin was he wouldn't let anything go, and I'll admit myself, my early seasons when I played were brilliant, but I was playing on adrenaline. I didn't really get what it was all about, and I think that season in particularly, I took a dip, and Kevin literally sent me for the whole season back to the juniors. I played the odd game. I probably, I didn't even get enough to get a medal. But that was the kick up the arse I probably needed, because I could have went 1 or 2 ways that summer. I could have done what a lot of young lads do, which is just like get my head down and sort of sulk and probably go nowhere. Yeah, but what I did was I was lucky enough to find a bloke who changed my life, really. It changed my career. And if you speak to a lot of people in different sports, you speak to Johnny Wilkinson, you speak to Joey Barton, Danny Cipriani, Jonathan Edwards, Glenn McCrory, world champions. Thank God I found Steve Black, and we spent, again, on the ramp down there, spent all summer, me, Clarkey, the Newcastle Falcons rugby team, Glenn McCrory was training for a fight against Lennox Lewis, so I spent all that summer just getting to the best sort of physical shape and mental shape I could be at, and then, touch wood, never looked back from then. Got in the squad for the first game against Spurs, came on, and relatively played most of the seasons from then on. But if I hadn't met Blackie, I don't know where I'd have been.
Yeah, going into the Premier League, I mean, it was changing, wasn't it? It had been around for a couple of seasons, and Newcastle really took the bull by the horns and made a big impression, didn't they?
Started brilliantly, but I think that was sort of Kevin's mantra. He made us think. Walking down the tunnel, he just made us think that we could beat anybody. He made us think that there was nothing to fear. And I know we lost the first game against Spurs. I think Sheringham scored. It was a really tight game. Spurs were a top side, but we didn't really fear anybody back then, because that was his real strength. Looking at now, as people are talking about sports psychology, I think he did it without even knowing he was doing it, just because he had so much motivational power behind him. And I think we were just rolled our sleeves up and we were ready to take anybody in the Premier League. You
mentioned him earlier as well, Peter Beardsley, coming back to the club for the second time. How big a signing was that for the squad? Just to see somebody like him coming into the team.
Well, I think obviously Peter.
Doesn't say
Can't
this
help
much now,
it.
by the
Does he
way.
not?
No,
Has
no,
he made a concerted effort?
he's curbed
It's
it.
working on me then. No, he was, again, talking about me wanting to be Chris Waddle in the street. No, I remember, I was old enough to remember the last 2 or 3 games when we got promoted, that goal against, it was at Portsmouth where he just kept dummying the ball on the line, and then he chipped Joe Corrigan against City. He was somebody I would have just been happy to meet, let alone play alongside. So when he came in, as well as Kevin and Terry, but his like Kilcline, his impact wasn't just what you saw on the pitch, it was in the training ground every day. Every single session would be to the max. You'd never have a lazy day, you'd never have a day where he took his foot off the gas, and he wouldn't let anybody else in and around him. He was such a special player, and the spell he had with, Coley was phenomenal. You can't knock what Coley did up here, but I wonder how well he'd have done without Peter alongside him. He scored some fantastic goals, but Peter as well alongside him. And then if you ask Les, or you ask Alan, Janola, people like that, that nobody will ever underestimate Pedro's impact.
There was a couple of other players as well. Hottiger doesn't get much praise, but he came in and did quite well, didn't he? Swiss international, and certainly one of those players who doesn't get enough credit.
Well, no, because he was another right back, came in to replace me, wasn't he?
He was, yeah.
Fucking hell.
You had a few obstacles.
Barton,
But you got moved around, like.
Couldn't have thought much of me, like. But that was it. I always end up getting in somewhere, and I think that I had to, because I don't think he ever completely trusted us. But he was another lad, Hottiger, really good athlete, good player. Philippe Albert came in roughly the same time, pretty much the same time, and they just got the club. They got the city, and I think they were all good players. Kevin would never have bought somebody who wasn't a fantastic footballer, and I think back then you don't really do your homework as much as you do now. Nowadays you look into people's lifestyles, you look into what they're like as people, what the family situation's like, But back then it was just a gamble. I think you just took them on the worst players. But he had a real skill at getting everybody that came in, just got the club and the city. I remember first pre-season, went straight after the first pre-season training session at Jesmond. Hottiger, Albert, I know he wasn't for him, but Alex Matthew, Malcolm Allen, people like that. And within 2 or 3 days, we were just solid again as a group. These lads got it. And they couldn't believe the tune, by the way. They just they didn't know what had hit them.
What was it like training in front of the supporters? Kevin, certainly encouraged it, and I remember the days at Maiden Castle going up there, watching the lads train, and then at the end of the training session, Kevin insisting that you just went out and signed everything for all the fans up there.
Yeah, I don't quite get it now. I get why you can't just open the doors freely, but I don't quite get how there's such a void between players, staff and supporters. Even if it's once a week, even if it's once a month, there has to be a chance. And I think that was what was great about us in that era, that not even just the training, but if you finished a game, you'd be able to go into anywhere in town, and just any of the lads would be wandering around, and you'd be able to have a pint with them, be able to chat about the game to them. There's such a void now, and I don't understand why it's so big. Kevin just believed that the club belonged to the city, and we were employed by the fans, really, and he wouldn't hear of it. If we had a game of golf to play after training and one of us trying to sneak out, he'd be grabbing us by the back of the neck, like, no chance. Sign everybody's autograph before you go anywhere. And that's why that's why the fans took to Kevin so much, because it wasn't an act. He got it. He was a man of the people, and not many press would ever go against Kevin either, because they were all on board as well. And if they did, he was quite brutal. There was no way back.
Yeah, no, definitely. Talk about some of the foreign imports that were brought in. You mentioned a few of them there. Tino, for example, came in. What was Tino like in the dressing room? Any stories about him?
Oh, fuck no. I've got my wife here, man.
Anything you can tell without me sitting.
Nah, listen, he was just a one-off. But again, Like he just got it. He loved it. He didn't learn English. He just literally, and it sounds like he literally learned Geordie. Everything that he said in the English language was with Geordie accent. He just he came in from the first day when he got off the plane, and I think he'd even had a glass of red wine with Kevin when we were playing Middlesbrough, and then Kevin says, "Do you fancy going on the bench?" To coming on, I think he twisted Steve Vickers inside out, crossed it. Still a lot to do, by the way. But anyway, I scored.
Who scored?
Yeah, I managed to score, and then I just remember everybody, and I was like that. Everybody just ran past us. Everybody ran past us and started cuddling Tino, and I was like, right, this is it. But no, that was the start of it. But he was brilliant, and in the early days, he had a translator. His name was Jimmy. No, sorry, Jimmy was his brother. Sorry, no, it wasn't Jimmy.
Was it Jimmy Wallace?
No, it was. I can't remember his name. I'll say it's Jimmy for now. I'll get his name right. Anyway, he and his brother used to play with us at the boys' club, so he was a proper lad as well. But he lived in Spain for a long time, so he was given the job of being Tino's interpreter. And it must have been hard work, that. So we'd be in Julie's on a night out, and he'd have Tino say to him, "Just go and say this," and you'd see him wandering across, like young lad, green as grass, wandering across. You just see this girl just slapping the interpreter across the face, like, Tino just laughing his head off in the corner. But when he first signed, he used to go to, remember the Metro Centre used to have the Warner Brothers shop? That's where he used to get all these clothes. Honestly, he didn't go to flannels, or he didn't go anywhere. He went to Warner Brothers, and he'd come in, and he'd have a denim shirt on, and you'd think, well, that's not too bad, that one, today. And then he'd go to the bar, and he'd have like the full cast on his back, like fucking Tweety Pie and Roast Sandwich Sam and Tasmanian Devil on his, like, that's what he wore, but he couldn't give a toss. He was, again, his parties were for a different era, for a different talking. But nah, he was just brilliant. But as a talent, he was so special. The night against Barcelona, you sent us it actually, because I remember I sent it to Wraithy a few years back. I've seen all the highlights. I've never actually seen the full game. Sent me the DVD, and what's unbelievable about that game is not just his hat-trick, but his performance that night. I think they played a back three, and he literally occupied all three. It was like the best centre-forward performance I've ever seen. And bearing in mind, I've played games with Alan numerous times, Wayne Rooney, Big Les, Pedro. But that performance was just out of this world, and not just for the goals. And that's what he's capable of, but the other side of Tino was, we played West Ham on the Saturday, and he got took off at half time. It was shocking, and that's the man. Like, he was capable of unbelievable things, but he was always, God knows what he'd been doing before. I've got a rough idea what he'd been doing before the two games, but that was him. Unbelievable talent.
Okay, let's go to France. David Ginola, what was he like?
What's he like? What's he like now? I was at the game the other day, and he crept up behind us and started cuddling us and had a good chat with him and all that. And wife had never met him before, and he walked away, and she just went, "He's good looking, isn't he?" Yes, he is. Yes, he is. He was a good man to follow on the quayside, by the way. If him and Les were talking to a group, me and Clark would be like that with a wicket keeper gloves on, just hoping to get some nicks. But no, Les was the best player I saw, or the best player I've played with for probably a 6 or 7 month spell. He was 6'2", he was strong as an ox, he was mobile, he had 2 feet, as in 2 good feet. He could go either way. He didn't have much going for him really, and he ended up being a defender's nightmare because you couldn't show him anywhere. And he was, for 6 months, probably the first season really, he was the best thing you'd ever seen. And then, in fairness, Kenny had a tough decision to make. Kenny ended up selling him. But I do think, and we all thought at the time, we had seen the best of him. I think we got to the stage where he wanted to be in London maybe. He wasn't giving us as much. I mean, listen, poor John Beresford, like he was doing 2 jobs, but every time he'd mention it to Keegan, Keegan would just say, "Hey, listen, he'll win you more games than he loses you," and that was it. And he did. But when he stopped doing that, it was, he wasn't the player that we remember. I remember him and Alan having a couple of rows about, Alan had probably seen a lot of him, but once he got to play with him, he probably wasn't that standard that he used to be. For us anyway. He had great spells at Spurs, but honestly the most talented player, one of the best gentlemen, best looking bastards you've ever seen in your life. But I do think that he had that little shelf life. He wasn't one of them that you'd remember him because you couldn't not, but he wouldn't be one of them where you think years and years he was brilliant for us. But for that spell, unbelievable.
You also mentioned Philippe Albert. I mean, we'll hear stories from some of the other players about him, having a bit of a sense of humour and whatever. Have you got any stories about Big Phil?
Big Phil, just like unbelievable fella. Biggest pint drink I'll ever meet in your life. And bearing in mind I'm from Wales End, I've met a few. But Philippe, I remember one day he took us. Remember? Next to the Civic Centre, it's changed names loads of times, but it used to be called BRX. Philippe said, like, we'll have a night there. Like, every now and again, we'd all just decide, I'll do this for one night, you do the next night. So Philippe said, right, this is my night, we're going to have a Belgian beer night in BRX. Took us there, Jesus Christ. It was like, I think it was Duval, and there's another pint called Lucifer. I think they were about 8.5%, 9%. Philippe just necking them, and you just seen bodies lying around everywhere. The Newcastle's first team just lying everywhere on the Civic Centre lawns, thrown up in the Clark was lying on top of a taxi, and that was Philippe. Great fella, hell of a drinker, but great footballer. And he was probably the first. I think me and Bez were quite advanced fullbacks, as in. We were among the first era that attacked, scoring a few goals. But I think Philippe was the new breed of centre half back then. To Darren Peacock's fucking disgust and Steve Howie's disgust when he played with it, because Philippe used to pass the ball and just follow it. But if you see some of Philippe's goals, I mean, everybody remembers the Man U chip, but he scored a goal against Man City where he played about three 1-2s. And just slotted one in at the top end. You don't see centre halves do that anymore. Any centre halves. So Philippe, again, great centre half as a defender, but ahead of his time really as a sort of forward thinker.
You mentioned Fazackley being the man who was coaching, and Kevin, being the inspirational bit of a man manager. What was Terry Mack's job?
Well, listen, Terry Mack was important to Kevin, and he was great around the place. As I said before, never coached, but never claimed to coach. He wasn't one of these who didn't coach and made excuses. He literally said, I can't fucking coach. Can't coach, don't want me badges, don't want to coach. I'm assistant manager. And that was fair enough. No, Kevin would take sessions, the technical sessions Faz would take, but Terry was so important to Kevin, as was Arthur Cox. Arthur was in there, Sergeant Major. But he was always Kevin's sort of go-to guy, and Terry was always the guy that would be in the dressing room and be the guy that would back Kevin up. You could go and talk to Terry. Granted, what you said to him would definitely get back to Kevin, but no, Terry was important to Kevin, and he was great for us, and we all love him dearly, and we wish him well because he's not having a great time at the moment, health-wise.
Yeah. Kevin wore his heart on his sleeve. There's two incidents which really stand out from his time as manager at Newcastle that first time round. And first of all, is selling Andy Cole. I mean, and then going out on the steps at St James's Park and explaining to some supporters who went up there why he'd done it. What did you think of that?
It was a really brave thing to do. For selling Cole, he was the first thing. But don't get many managers explaining themselves to fans. But that's what Kevin thought of the fans. He thought they deserve an explanation, and I think he said, you have to trust me. I have to be able to do these things, and obviously got Keith for a bargain really in the process. I think I'd got Keith that move because I think he turned inside me at Old Trafford and put one in the top corner. So Keith's got me to thank for that, being a shit defender. But then you bring Les in, and as I say, Les give us a different type of centre forward for the Premier League maybe. But let's get it right. Coley didn't do badly after us either. He's the second top scorer. Is he still second, or is Harry Kane called? Second top scorer in Premier League history. So, and you know what? When you speak to Coley, he had a fantastic time up here. But he also was maybe ready to go. He loved Man U. He loved playing alongside Yorkie. They became best mates. So, you know, the move arguably worked for both.
The other occasion, of course, is when, you know, the Newcastle United's attempts to win the Premier League started to dip, the form had dipped, and Kevin went on TV and gave that infamous speech, would love it if we beat them, love it. And, you know, you guys were getting back onto the team coach, and you know, obviously it's repeated time and time again now. What was the feeling in the dressing room after that?
I see the poster the other day. Is there a play about that?
Yeah, it starts next week at the Live Theatre.
Is it?
Yeah.
Right, okay, I'm going to go and watch that. We didn't know about it, obviously. It was a tough game. We beat Leeds 1-0, and we were getting on the coach. I think the press officer at the time was Graham Courtney. And I just remember, like, waiting on the bus for a while. And I remember Graham Courtney coming on the bus, and Kevin was following him. And we were sitting quite close to the front. I just remember Graham just sort of looking at us going... so nobody knew what had happened, and back then we didn't have Sky Sports on the bus, so it wasn't until we all got home till we understood what he'd said. And then Dave Batty, like, literally must have memorised the whole rant. Dave Batty must have memorised the whole rant, so every time Kevin come out for the next 2 weeks, he'd just go through it all in the warm-up. And Kevin would just laugh his head off, you know. Bats was another one, you know, we haven't mentioned him. Unbelievable player for us, David Batty. Great player. You'll never see him again, like. You know, he almost hated football. But when he played, he was all in. But you know, he'd be one of them. He'd turn in just before you were going out from Wetherby. He'd do the session, he'd be brilliant. The minute he finished, he'd be back in his car screeching out, and we'd be still playing head tennis and stuff. But as a player on the pitch, he was unbelievable. But yeah, he had an unbelievable sort of impression of Kevin. But didn't surprise you. Nobody, you know, everybody just helped you love him more, because that's him. You know, there was no hiding for Kevin. There was no like sort of. You were never in any doubt what he thought. He'd never lie. You'd never have to worry about what he was thinking. He'd just tell you that's him, and that was one of his huge skills. I think, you know, I think it was a big bonus. That just shows to people what he meant. Fergie must have been sitting in the house, like, just fucking rubbing his hands, thinking, I've got him here. But for us, like, we just thought it was a mark of the man, really.
Again, that season, you know, that we didn't win the league, it was probably two games that stand out. You know, the 4-3 at Liverpool and the 1-0 at home. I think, you know, Man United hit some great form. Cantona 1-0, Schmeichel stopping everything in goal. But that game at St James's Park was a key, wasn't it? I think we had something like 45, 50 shots at goal, and he saved every single one.
I put it down to one thing, to be honest with you. Barton instead of Watson on the start lineup.
Yeah, I'd agree.
No, it was just, yeah, it was one of those games. Look, I've seen it loads of times. Schmeichel was the best goalkeeper I've ever seen. I'm sure you might all have different opinions, but I bet you he probably wins a lot of votes for the best goalkeeper of our era. Pull it down to average finishing on the day, but Philippe hit the crossbar. They didn't have a lot of chances. He's volleyed it into the ground and it's bounced over. It was one of those nights where you thought, you know, that was huge. That was huge. And goals went in against us. You know, Ian Warnes at Notts Forest, you know, pulled in from 35 yards. There's nobody more disappointed that we didn't win a title than I am. But when I do look back at it, and I just think, well, over the season we played the same way. I don't think we got any worse. I just think Man United were the run they went on at the very end. They deserved to win it. You know, should we have won it? Yes, I think we should have won it. But Man United had a run. I think they won 16 of the last 18 games. We'd never probably did that. We were just, you know, Man U probably started slower than they would have done. But no, listen, there's not a day goes by where I don't think about that.
We'll finish up the first half just with Kevin's departure. I mean, how big a shock was it, and how big a blow was it, you know, to you and the lads?
Didn't see it coming. You know, I didn't see it coming at all. Alan had just signed, hadn't he? Well, signed in the summer. We hadn't had a brilliant start, but we were more than capable of. Well, we did. We finished second that season. Got ourselves into Europe, and you know, second 2 seasons in a row would have been a huge achievement. But and I still, you know what? I still sit here and don't know the 100% of the real reason. Kevin's never sort of said it to us as players. I don't know if he's ever divulged it in an interview, but he just kind of said, "I think I've taken it as far as we can go." Obviously devastated, but then you have to get on with it as a player. You can't sit and sulk because there's always a game. So I think that was it New Year's Day or
It was just after the FA Cup.
just after the FA Cup, early January, and then it was Charlton away, and it was, and then Kenny comes in, and again, you know, none of us want to lose Kevin, but Kenny had won the league with Blackburn. Alan had spoken really, David Batty and Alan Shearer had spoken really highly of Kenny. Kenny again, from somebody from my era, supporting football in the 80s, another idol, albeit not from my team, another footballing idol. So you're looking forward, if Kevin's gone, you're looking forward to the next chapter of playing under another legend.
Okay, we'll come to that in the second half. For now, put your hands together for Steve Watson.